Hello everyone, good evening and welcome to Mental Health TV. We're really pleased to see you with us tonight. We're going to be talking to the fantastic, controversial and generally wonderful Tony Deane, who is going to be talking to us about all things mental health law and AMP related. But before we go over for Tony to introduce himself, we just go to Vanessa so that you understand how you can join in and ask us lots of questions.
Hello everyone. If you're watching this on Facebook Live, you will you'll know how to join the conversation. I know we've got a few people who join us every week now, which is great. If you're watching for the first time on Facebook, then you can comment in the comments box, and we'll thank you.
Oh, I want one of those.
Lovely. Yes, please.
A coffee. Yeah. You could, yeah. So if you're joining on Facebook, you'll see that there's a comments box. If you ask any questions in there, we'll feed the questions in tonight's discussion. We'd love it if you did ask questions and comment as we go along. If you want to follow us on Twitter instead, you just find the MHTV hashtag and follow that. And again, you can ask questions there, and I'll be keeping an eye on the Twitter feed as well. Thank you. And I'll hand over to Tony to introduce himself.
Oh, I'm not used to being called by my first name and my surname, and such a lovely introduction from an RMN. So my name is Tony. I really am an AMP. I'm a real live AMP. There aren't many of us around, it seems. And lots of people have no idea what an AMP is, or, Nicky, what the P stands for. You now know, don't you, Nicky?
I do know now. I can't believe I did it before. I'm so embarrassed. Oh. Tell us then, Tony.
AMP stands for Approved Mental Health Professional, not practitioner, not prat, not some of the other things that people will call us. So most people have no idea what an AMP is or does, and that is probably a good thing, because no one rings me when everything is okay. So, what do you want to know? Do you want to know about me, or do you want to know about the job, or do you want to
Tell us a little bit about yourself, and then we'll go on to have a talk about the role, I think.
Well, I'm a social worker by background. I'm a mental health social worker. Most AMPs are by background. 95% or 96% of AMPs, depending on who you believe, are social workers by background. Although I know we're going to talk about the Mental Health Act review and the proposed white paper. In 2007, when the Mental Health Act was amended, the 83 Act, the non-social workers, the approved mental health professional thing came about because non-social workers were allowed to become approved mental health professionals. None of them chose, not very many of them chose to do it, which is always an interesting conversation. So to be an AMP, you have to be a RMN, learning disability nurse, I think.
Yeah.
You can be a psychologist or an occupational therapist. So to my knowledge, and I hope Kier's watching, there are 3 OTs, allegedly 2 psychologists, and probably 30 or 40 RMNs who've decided to become AMPs.
Wow.
Question is always, why are the numbers so low?
Yeah. Okay, so we can come to that. So what is it exactly an AMP does? Tell us.
So AMPs coordinate Mental Health Act assessments. So I trained as a social worker, and then I had hair. I was slimmer. I was much better looking. So my mother says anyway. And I trained as a social worker, and then you get a bit of experience, and you're allowed to become a senior social worker, and then you get a little bit more experience, and they sent you off to do what was called the approved social worker course. When I did it, it was 6 weeks of taught in-house and 30 days of placement.
Yeah.
To become an AMP now, you go off to university. Depending on the length of the course, so if it's part-time, full-time, it's anything between 12 months and 18 months, and it's at least a postgraduate diploma. So I always tell people that AMPs are smarter than we look. Okay, so most AMPs will have now a level 7 qualification from a university, and it's a combination of, learning, theory, stuff, and the most important thing is a practice placement, where you get to practice being an AMP. Imagine practicing being an AMP. Imagine what that looks like. So AMPs coordinate mental health act assessments. So what happens is someone rings us. Someone rings us and says, well, you use your name, Nicky. Well, we will say, Nicky's not very well. Can you come and assess her and make a decision about whether she needs to be in hospital or not? And that's where the word section comes from, isn't it? Everyone thinks they have an idea or a notion of what sectioned is. And people think of section 2 and section 3, but sectioned isn't a legal thing. It doesn't mean anything. What AMPs are assessing you for is to be detained under the Act. If an AMP makes an application to detain you under the Mental Health Act, then you're detained, not sectioned. And I think when I have this conversation with people, I always start off with the notion that, most people have no idea what an AMP is. Most people have no idea what an AMP does. And most people have never read the Mental Health Act, or, dare I mention it, the Mental Health Act Code of Practice. So, how many sections are in the Mental Health Act, Nicky? I know the answer.
180 something. It's tons of them.
That's not bad. 147. The section 147 is my favorite section. It's called the silly section. It's literally called the silly section. SCILLY. Silly's where I go on my holidays. So silly basically means, the silly section means you can use the Mental Health Act on silly. Okay. So AMPs will be asked to assess people in all sorts of places. In your house, in a police station, if you're already an inpatient, in emergency department. My favourite job is when I worked in the homeless mental health team. I've assessed people on the street corner. That is interesting, difficult. And I don't think most people know what that looks like. A colleague of mine has done a paper, very smart colleague of mine, professor or doctor, I can't remember which one, Lisa Morris. It's a paper, but it's called Dirty Work. But AMPs doing dirty work, doing unto others. It's other work done to others over in the street corner or over there somewhere. Because I think most people, when they ring us, sort of go, they want somebody to do something. Of course, they don't want it to do them. They don't want to do it themselves. So basically, AMPs have the legal authority and power to detain you under the Mental Health Act. It's a big chunk of power. I always talk about we have lots of duties, we have lots of authority, but actually in reality doing this thing, I'm not sure we have the power people think we have. If I come to your house and I assess you with the 2 doctors and we make the decision to detain you, and I fill in a pink form, because that's the legal bit. It's a legal bit. There's form filling involved. Oh, I can only fill in the pink form, by the way, if the NHS tells me where the bed is. And if there's no bed, Nicky,
you can see there being a problem.
It becomes this issue about seriously. It's an interesting, difficult, challenging, sometimes ridiculously funny, ridiculously difficult job. But imagine being in someone's house and doing that, organising it. And doing that bit of having the conversation, and you have to tell the person, by the way. So, Nicky, thanks for talking to me. We're going to detain you on the Mental Health Act, but there isn't a bed. So we're going to leave now. When we come back, if we come back, there'll be a bed. Can you let us back in again, please? And could you then come with us? And then when we come back, we go, Nicky, the bed's 150 miles away. How do you feel about that?
Already, I'm not keen.
Well, you weren't keen to start with.
I'm less keen.
You're less keen now.
Real issues, haven't you?
So, I mean, when I talk to people about this sort of stuff, you end up saying, like, what should be the difficult bit? The assessment, the building the relationship with you, the talking to you, the finding out what's going on in the background. That becomes the sort of easy bit. Because most people will talk to you. Most people are decent and reasonable, even when distressed, unwell, and will avoid that conversation about whether mental illness or mental disorder is a real thing or not. The difficult thing is all the practical stuff. actually getting multi-agency partnership working to work.
Yeah.
That's where things begin to fall down. I'm surprised we detain so many people, because it's actually quite difficult to organise and sort. Do you have any idea how many assessments AMPs do a year?
Each or overall?
Overall.
I think you must do about 20 assessments a year per person. I don't know what that would work out as over the course of your time, over the course of a year. How much is it? Tell me.
Well, nobody knows. That's the truth. Okay.
That's a mean question.
But it's really important that nobody knows, okay? Because nobody collects the information centrally.
How weird is that?
How weird is that? So we know how many people are detained every year. How many people are detained every year, roughly?
No idea.
Well, we know how many detentions there are. There are about 50,000 detentions. Now, that's not 50,000 people, okay? Because some of those people will be detained multiple times.
Yeah.
So, and some of those people will be 2s to 3s. But they reckon that the ADAS today, big bosses, big cheeses, did a snapshot survey in 2017, and they reckoned that AMPs in England and Wales coordinated 140,000 Mental Health Act assessments a year. So 140,000 led to 50,000 detentions. So, we are not detaining people.
Yeah.
We're not detaining people more often than we are. But that's a huge chunk of work to be getting through. And no one's actually centrally counting it. And there was something else about, 136s. How many 136s are there in a year?
I dread to think. I've had some experiences.
Do you know what 136 is?
Yes.
Go on then, tell me.
Well, no, I think I do, and you've filled me with doubt. Isn't it when you detain someone from 135 is from the house and 136 is from the street? Is that right? Have I got it the right way around? Or I've practiced them the wrong way around.
Yeah, you've got it the right way around. A 135 is a warrant. Okay, it's a warrant. There are two 135 warrants, a 135-1 and a 135-2. The warrant allows a police officer in the company. 131 allows a police officer in the company of an AMP and a doctor to come to your house, knock the door. If you don't open the door, they can use the special key. You know what the special key looks like?
It looks like a boot, doesn't it?
looks like a big red ram, actually.
Yeah.
It depends what the police officers bring. And it allows the police officer to the police officer, the AMP, the doctor, to enter your house to make an initial assessment and to remove you to a place of safety if necessary for the purpose of assessment. It's not a nice thing to do.
No.
Do you know many of them there are every year?
I don't think there's that many. Yeah, I don't think there's that many of those. I think there's way more from the street.
There's been an increasing number of them, but nobody knows. The only reason I know how many we do in my local authority is because we now have to pay for them.
Oh.
As part of austerity. Before 2009, these things were free. And then in 2009, the court service said, you have to pay us 75 quid for this now. So each local authority will know how many they get, because that's the thing.
I find that so worrying.
That's my dog.
You can bring her in for a cuddle if you want. That's no problem. We do love a dog.
AMPs are approved and normally employed by local authorities because they're independent from the NHS. I know I make a joke. There'll be doctors watching this, maybe. Do you know why the role exists?
Tell me.
The role exists to bring a social perspective to the detention of people, okay?
Yeah.
And basically, throughout history, doctors in psychiatry could not be trusted.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. No one can be trusted with that kind of power by themselves. I don't think any profession would acquit themselves well.
So
allegedly, not like me to defend a psychiatrist.
Some of my friends are psychiatrists. They love me dearly.
I can imagine they must.
So where do we get to?
Yeah, we got to the fact that no one's counting, which I find really interesting. So if no one's counting, and they're only counting when they're being billed, how do we know that we're not detaining some people more than others or unfairly? Or how are we keeping an eye on that?
Well, that's different, isn't it? We're talking about the 135. The 135, it leads to an assessment. So if you're detained following a 135, that'll be captured. If you're not detained, that won't be captured. Right. 136, the number was, yes, there are about 30,000 136s every year. We know this because the police keep a number, and again, it has to be reported to the CQC. But again, the outcome doesn't get recorded, doesn't have to be recorded unless you're detained. So 30,000 people a year are being picked up by it's the police power. They can use, only the police have the power, and they can use it in anywhere that's not your dwelling. And again, it's for the purpose of assessment, and they take you to a place of safety. Hopefully it's a health-based place of safety.
Yeah.
Hopefully it's not a police cell. It's illegal now to take children to police cells, but these things, people used to be taken to police cells.
Yeah.
And lots of people don't realise, is Section 136 an arrest, Nicky?
No.
Yes.
No.
Yes.
That's so unfair.
It's an arrest. It's a preserved power of arrest. People don't think of it as an arrest, and it's not because it's a detention. But actually, legally, it could appear on your. What checks do we have to have? I'm old. DBS. I say CRB, but it's DBS, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's the police discussion. It is technically an arrest. So 136 is ever increasing, and there are people that will tell you that 136 is overused, underused, abused, and used appropriately. All of the above is true.
Yeah.
So
I think that's possibly true. So we've got a bit of an idea then about what an AMP does. We've got some idea of what the procedure for sectioning is. Maybe it'd be a good idea to just nail down exactly what the procedure is. So, you get a report that maybe I'm not very well. What happens next? What's the actual procedure for?
We get a referral. Now, normally our referrals would come from GP, normally crisis resolution home treatment teams. But, there'll be some sort of involvement with some sort of secondary service first. Psychiatric Liaison is a good example of this. And if you're arrested and you're in a cell, there'll be lots of custody blocks now have liaison services. So, someone will make a referral to the AMP service for a mental health assessment because someone somewhere thinks you need to be in hospital. So that's quite interesting in itself, because people think because they've made the referral that the AMP has to appear. Okay, that's not what the law says. Section 13 of the Mental Health Act says that the AMP has to consider the need for the Mental Health Act assessment. Consider the need for it. That doesn't mean has to do it. And I think part of when you get the second bit of the conversation about why numbers are up, although we're not an emergency service, and some people would like AMPs to be an emergency service, we're not in Team 999. I have to pay to park at hospitals. I don't have blue flashing lights and stripy go faster stripes down the side of my car. Some of my colleagues don't actually drive. So first thing is we consider it. Does this, on the information we've got, need doing? Sometimes we say no. It doesn't need doing. Dear people who are ringing us and worried about Nicky, go and try something else. Go and try harder, because the first line response to someone in crisis shouldn't be the threat of a mental health act or coercion or an AMP. It might be appropriate, it might not be, but sometimes we say no. People on 136 we have to see. The legal duty is for people have to be seen at least by a doctor and an AMP. That doesn't mean a full-on mental health act assessment. It generally does, but it doesn't mean that. So first of all, we'll make the decision. Do we need to do this? Now, of course, everyone that's ringing us, Nicky, thinks it's urgent.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I work in a team where the most mental health assessments requests we received in a day was 36. We don't have 36 AMPs.
No.
The NHS doesn't have 36 beds.
No.
So in order to do a mental health assessment, you need an AMP and two doctors. Ideally, you would go with two doctors. Okay, but what tends to happen is the first doctor's already seen you, filled in a medical recommendation, the pink form. So, we come and see you, we knock your door, we say hello. Do you have to let me in?
No.
No's the right answer, but Section 115 of the Act says you do actually, but it's not enforceable. No. I have the right of entry into your house.
Yeah.
Except for a hospital under Section 115. But the technical answer is no, you don't really have to let me in. You don't have to acquiesce to the Mental Health Act assessment. So we rock up. I have to find a doctor, Section 12 doctor they're called. They're approved under Section 12 of the Mental Health Act. Do you know these are volunteers, Nicky?
Yeah, I was surprised.
So the whole thing is they're pretty well remunerated volunteers. They're paid for it. But I have to find a volunteer. Last year, I had to ring 26 doctors one day to get a doctor to come with me to do a Mental Health Act assessment. And it wasn't a particularly tricky Mental Health Act assessment. It wasn't. But so you're ringing me. You're telling me it's urgent. I take the information off you. I say thanks very much. We're going to do it. Hang on while I find a doctor. There are various ways of finding ones. You might have your own list of doctors. There's an app now that's available, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. But the whole thing is predicated on the notion of you have to find a volunteer. So when I get the doctor, when I get myself, then I get the home treatment team, we go with you. Now, most Mental Health Act assessments happen that way. Do you know not everybody wants to see us? Not everybody who sees us is nice. Some people are resistant to the notion. Some people are violently resistant to the notion. Yeah. So you have to coordinate this group of people to attend. Then you get there. That might take I don't know how many phone calls. You get there. If you can get in, normally you do the Mental Health Act assessment, and then make the decision to detain or not. If I'm in your house. How do I get you and we do detain you, how do we get you from the house to the hospital?
Try an ambulance normally, isn't it?
The ambulance service is contracted to do it. The issue is, I'm sure you've heard of party of esteem. You've heard of party of esteem, haven't you?
I am familiar with the concept,
Yeah, there's even the law about it.
Yeah.
So I ring the ambulance up and I say, I have detained Nicky here under the Mental Health Act. Could you send an ambulance to convey her, please? Thank you very much. So what they say, do you know what the first thing they say to me is?
It's not an emergency.
That's not the first thing they say to me. The NHS Ambo Trust likes to look after their staff. They say, is the person likely to be dangerous and resistant? To which I say, no, they're likely to be unhappy. But the ambulances tend not to prioritise mental health calls as a priority. So you could wait, and I could for how long?
Hours and hours and hours.
I've waited for hours now. Sometimes they're very good in the peer, but they're in charge of their response time. Yeah. Whether they think it's So it's all about multi-agency partnership working. It doesn't
which is always a challenge.
It's always. It tends not to be straightforward.
Yeah.
I mean, I've given the example of being in your house doing it. I mean, again, we'll do assessments in hospitals, in acute hospitals, in psychiatric hospitals, in police stations. I've been into a pub and asked somebody to step outside, please. Thank you very much.
Yeah, it's a really interesting thing. Because when you actually look at it, it's a lot less well organised than you would think it would be. Considering it's an incredibly serious thing to detain someone, to take away their liberty, we don't really do it to anybody else in society, do we? I think infectious diseases is the only thing you can compel people for if they haven't committed a crime, something like that.
Mental Capacity Act, maybe.
Yeah. But it's a big deal to do it, particularly I think in a society that values its autonomy so highly and its ability to choose things. So you'd think that it would happen a little more smoothly than maybe it does currently.
You would think it would be resourced better, wouldn't you?
Oh, a resource, yeah.
And this goes back to the initial start of this conversation about I often consider AMPs to be invisible, and I think that invisibility reflects the stigma and status around the people that we work with, back to that notion of dirty work. This is work that's done to others, by others, over there in the corner somewhere, you know. And despite what the Act and the Code say, I mean, the Code is very good. The Mental Health Act Code is very good. It tells us how we should do these things, like conveying, how we should do warrants, how we should do this. But most of this is dependent on mostly NHS commissioning,
right?
And how it organises itself around how it's going to do this, because you know, it's about ambulances, it's about doctors, it's about beds. The amps are part of that. Also, the local authority has a part to play in that. The local authority has to have enough amps. It's fairly clear that there aren't enough amps to do the work that's going on. We're getting older, fatter, and bolder together. You know, and that was part of the reason why, you know, the ASW rule was changed to allow others to do it. It was recognised that there isn't the workforce to continue to do this stuff. And you know, for me, that's not been addressed in any serious way. There's been a lot of, to be fair, there's been a lot more sort of conversation about it, a lot more emphasis on it, a lot more chat about it in various circles, but actually nothing tangible in terms of, you know, basically I'm a local government civil servant with in theory an awful lot of authority, legal authority and power. I mean, I can come to your house, sign a piece of paper and take you away. I mean, I can really do that. That's quite shocking, isn't it? But, you know, I often describe the system as dysfunctional, and it's failing. You know, it's failing the people that we're supposed to be there to serve. It's also failing the staff that are working within it, because it's just difficult to do. It's more difficult to do than it should be. I often talk about being left up the creek without a paddle or a boat. Yeah, you know.
But one of the things I think that the reason we want to talk to you is because we've had changes to the Mental Health Act. These things are, you know, people have been discussing the problems that we're having, and I think maybe there were people who thought that things might be getting a bit better, and that a lot of these kind of difficulties in the system are being tidied up. I wondered if you could tell us a little bit about that, in terms of, you know, what's been going on, what the changes are, and has it actually improved things?
Well, the changes haven't been introduced yet. So we're talking about the Wesleyan review that happened in 2018, and then the white paper that's come out this year. So obviously, the review was kicked into the long grass by the COVID, Brexit.
Yeah.
Well, I quite like the Brexit debate. I'm from Northern Ireland. We could have a different conversation about that. Yeah. So the review, again, you sort of talk about the Mental Health Act. You know, the Mental Health Act that we have today is basically, it's when people talk, the right language to use is the 1983 Act as amended by the 2007. Basically, the Act we have today is the 1959 Act that was amended in 1983, 2007. And you can trace the Mental Health Act itself all the way back to the sort of poor laws and lunacy acts.
Yeah.
And the Act, the language is archaic, it's sexist, it's misogynistic, it's all sorts of things. But I think people like me would generally tell you that the Mental Health Act itself isn't the problem. You know, the Act isn't the problem. It's I'll tell you what the real problem is. The real problem is poverty, inequality, and shite housing. I always say shite housing. If you wanted to take mental health seriously, you would treat it as a public health issue.
Yeah.
You know, and deal with it that way. You know, the Act, yes, it needs amending. The language needs changing, and you know, undoubtedly, Wesleyan Review is a good thing. They took a huge amount of time in doing it.
Simon Wesley.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Professor Simon Wesley, former big cheese of the Royal College of Psychiatry.
Very well, very same.
You know, so, you know, but the way it was done, it seemed to be. Seems to be. Sorry, there's stuff up here on the screen that I can't really see from Vanessa. Sorry, it's distracting me.
Don't worry.
Don't worry about it. I'm making a note of the questions so I don't lose them, but I'll come to them.
No, it's all right. It was just a fact. We'll get to the review. So, I mean, I've got the review. I've pulled up a bit of the review in front of me.
Yeah, do tell us. Yeah.
So, it talks about, the first thing is proposal to reform the Mental Health Act, new guiding principles. Okay. And, you know, no one's going to argue these aren't good things.
Yeah.
Choice and autonomy, least restrictive options, therapeutic benefit, which is interesting, and the person as an individual. Now, did you know the Mental Health Act already has guiding principles?
No. They're the same.
they're in the code of practice. They're much the same. They're not in law. That would be the difference. Okay. They're currently in the code, and they're much the same. There's 5. I can't remember off the top of my head, but you know, this is bringing them into the law. Now, I always go back to the code of practice, because should the code of practice, we should only deviate from it now for congent reasons, and we should record those reasons. But most people have never read it, so they don't know if they're deviating from it or not.
Yeah.
So no one's going to argue that these things aren't a decent thing. Don't need saying out loud. They're going to be enshrined in law. But what do they actually mean? So the second bit is clearer, stronger detention criteria. And this is starting to talk, at the minute, Section 1 and Section 1 defines sort of mental disorder, and that's the language it uses. And we only detain people because we think they need to be, you know, there's a risk to themselves or others, and, you know, the language goes on about stuff. But this is going to talk about people being a substantial likelihood of harm. And if you detain them, it's going to be of a therapeutic benefit. What does that mean?
Well, it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because it's making the assumption that being detained to an inpatient unit is going to be therapeutically enhancing for somebody. And that's not necessarily the case.
Well, I'm familiar, and I don't know if most people are familiar with the notion of iatrogenic harm.
Iatrogenic.
That's it.
Yeah.
Big word.
So iatrogenic is harm caused by the system that's supposed to be helping you, basically. So if you take medication and you put weight on, or if you are compelled to be somewhere, and then, for example, like the sexual safety stuff we did a little while ago, you're actually not safe there. You're hurt there whilst you're compelled to be there by law. Those things are really serious impacts of the system that is trying to be supportive. So, sorry, Tony. Yeah.
That's all right. No, absolutely. I mean, we're talking about stuff like restraint, medication given under restraint, and just the chaos of an board. So, you know, is that going to
about austerity as well, isn't there? There's a problem there about austerity because, well, it's a fine line in terms of somebody having to present as being a significant risk. And given that a lot of services have pulled away and people don't have the services that they used to have, the potential for people to, who could be supported informally, but end up under Mental Health Act detention's higher. And certainly, working in prisons, I know anecdotally that far more people who suffer from severe mental health difficulties are ending up in the prison system now because of austerity. And I think, the changes in the Mental Health Act place the issue with mental health professionals rather than the issue with this, with the current system around.
But I'll go back to the answer I gave: poverty, inequality, and shared housing, domestic violence, substance misuse. All this stuff contributes. I think we have to be careful though around the notion of, there's been a conflating of mental well-being and it's a very old. I'm going to use a very old-fashioned term because I'm very old now. Serious mental illness, SMI. Most that AMPs are asked to see aren't in the first group of sort of, IAP type stuff, moderately depressed, anxiety. These things aren't nice, but you're not going to get to see the likes of me because of this. We're still talking about the detention criteria. I think doctors and AMPs are just going to write different things on pink forms.
Yeah.
I.e., we think you're a substantial risk to yourself or others. And we think there's a therapeutic benefit of you being detained to a psychiatric hospital. We know it's not brilliant, but that's I think in practice that's what we'll do. I remember sitting behind the review. It was the concern about the overrepresentation of black people, and other ethnic minorities. That's sitting behind a lot of this work. So, that was the second thing. The next thing is tribunals. Tough, giving tribunals more of a role in giving patients who are detained more of a right to sort of challenge the detention. Currently, if you're detained under the Act, if you get detained by Section 2, that's that's 2 doctors and an AMP. A Section 3, again, a doctor and an AMP. The first renewal of that is by your RC, and then every renewal subsequent to that is simply by your RC. So you can be detained on the say-so of a doctor. You have the right to appeal to a tribunal. Tribunals don't discharge that many people. Hospital managers meetings don't discharge that many people. So there's a toughening up of that. You get more rights to tribunals and more help with the tribunal. No one's going to argue that shouldn't be happening. Stuff about CTOs and the tribunals. The stuff about strengthening the patient's right to choose and refuse. That's talking about better advocacy, changing the nearest relative to a nominated person, them having a bigger and better role. Now, I'll come back. Let me come back to the nominated person, because that's really interesting from an AMP point of view. I'm just working my way through the Act. It's a long thing I have in front of me. Where did I get to? Still on the tribunals. Improving support to people who are detained. Again, that's about better advocacy. The stuff about your prior sort of notion, again, it's still going to be overruled. The doctors in general, based on their clinical experience and knowledge, can step outside what they're supposed to do, can't they? Or what's nice evidence to treat people, isn't it? You see it all the time with some sorts of medication. So you can write down, I'm not willing to take this, and I would. Well, ECT is probably the most controversial example. You might write down that you never want the ECT, but if you're on a ward and the second doctor decides that you are catatonic and you need this treatment, your advance directive isn't legally binding. If the doctor writes down that it's to save your life, you're going to get the treatment.
But that's not necessarily different from any other types of treatment, is it? In terms of how they would respond in a medical emergency.
Depends who you ask, and certainly
it's grey area time.
If it was in physical healthcare, they would probably have to go to the court of protection. And the court would have to decide whether you do. There's a very famous case of a man with schizophrenia. He has gangrene in his leg. Okay. And the doctors say he's going to die if we don't cut his leg off. Okay. And they all trip off to the court of protection. And the judge goes to talk to the man. And all the doctors have said he lacks the capacity to make the decision simply because he's not, I'm paraphrasing obviously, but the argument seems to be because he's got schizophrenia and he doesn't understand the full situation that he's in, somehow the doctors know best. The judge said, he's got the capacity to make the decision. Fast forward a few months, guess what happened?
What happened?
He still got his leg. It's back to the iatrogenic harm thing. None of this is an exact science. So number 7, the Mental Capacity Act, the Mental Health Act, the interface, the review hasn't really touched that stuff because the LPS, Liberty Protection Safeguard stuff is coming in. So the review sort of kicked that, for me, it's sort of kicked that into the long grass a wee bit. There's stuff about the criminal justice system, Vanessa, that you'll know about. Currently, someone being transferred from prison to hospital is done under Part 3 of the Act. They're actually suggesting that AMPs, because we're useful, somehow get involved in that process. They don't need AMPs to get involved in that process. Because at the moment, a doctor has to write a report and the Ministry of Justice has to find you a bed. There's a reoccurring theme in all this, the bed.
Yeah.
And you get transferred. What we have seen over the last 10, 15 years, and linked to austerity probably again, is more of this gate, what we call asking us to assess people at the gate. Part 2 of the Act doesn't apply to sentenced or remand prisoners.
Mm-hmm.
So we're seeing referrals from prisons saying, could you meet Mr. Bloggs at the gate because we think he's unwell?
Mm-hmm.
That's a ridiculous position to be in.
Yes, it is.
You know, people are asking AMPs, the Section 12 doctors and the crisis system to do something in hours that they can't do in days, weeks, months sometimes. Because the only reason they're asking us to do it, usually, I mean, sometimes there's a legitimate reason, but usually it's because they haven't been able to get a bed. But the next bit is about people with learning disabilities and autism.
Yeah.
Big bit, okay.
Yeah, tell us about that.
I think it's in general, it's careful what you wish for, okay. Undoubtedly, it's going to remove autism and learning disability as a mental disorder legally in terms of the Act. But I mean, people aren't detained at the moment simply because they've autism and learning disability. They're detained because there's a caveat to that about abnormally aggressive or irresponsible behaviour. So generally what happens at the moment is AMPs get called to assess people because they're in crisis, usually around this lovely word of transitions. You know, young people are transitioning into adults and their families can no longer manage them. And the doctors and the AMP turn up and say, well, you need help and we're going to help you. And we're going to detain your loved one to an assessment and treatment unit for assessment. And you're going to get the help you need. Do you know what happens next?
Tell me.
They stay there. On average, they stay there for 8 years, it seems. There are about 3,000 people detained in assessment and treatment units. Most of them probably don't need to be there. They may have needed to be there initially, but actually, you know, the arrangements around discharging people. So the Mental Health Act is going to, the suggestion is that people can no longer be detained on Section 3. They can only be detained on Section 2 in certain circumstances around risk, you know, to go back to the first stuff.
Yeah.
But there's a but in this. If you get detained under Section 3 or a Section 37 or other sections of the Mental Health Act, the forensic ones, what entitlement does it give you, Nicky?
That you should have an advocate?
No.
What then?
Have you heard of Section 117?
Yeah.
Yeah. So Section 117 is a legal entitlement to aftercare. It's free.
Don't get me started. I was hoping that we'd see the end of CTOs, which are...
no, it's not to do with CTOs.
No, but what I mean is this idea about aftercare, about having people in the community, about people having the support that they need, and about how the interface between inpatients and outpatients is managed, or community work is managed. And for me, I have some real issues with that.
I have real issues with continuing healthcare assessments. So, but you know, at the moment, in theory, if you're detained under Section 3, you get what's called Section 117 entitlements. If people with LD and autism are not to be detained under Section 3, now, you know, 117 isn't what it all cracked up to be, et cetera, and something justified. But ultimately, it entitles you to free aftercare.
So you're saying that if they remove this power of detention, it then means that they're not going to get the support in the community, particularly with funding being so tight. People are only going to do what they have to do. And if there's no legal requirement, then it could well be that those populations are put at risk of not having the support that they need.
I think there's a danger. I think there's a real danger of it, whether it's an unforeseen consequences or something that people are working on. I don't think people are purposely doing it. I think people want to detain less people, but actually the way to detain less people is to have the better upstream stuff. You know, it was a Desmond Tutu. It's always better to pull them up upstream rather than pull them up out of the river downstream.
Yeah, definitely.
But I think for me it's a real sort of thing to be thinking about, because you know it's the same conversation about the MCA and the Mental Health Act. Which would you rather be detained under, Nicky?
Which would I be rather detained under than which?
The Mental Capacity Act in your best interests, or the Mental Health Act under Section 3? Which detention would you prefer?
Section 3.
All day long. I have told my kids if it comes to it, and I have told my colleagues if it comes to it, please put me on a Section 3, because that means they won't have to sell the house for my care. Because the state will have to pay for it. And you have more, arguably you have more rights when you're detained under the Section 3, or under the Mental Health Act than you have under the MCA, arguably, So, and then the actual white paper goes on to talk about lots of other things, about workforce and all sorts of stuff. I'd encourage people to read the stuff. Vanessa can probably throw it up in the chat, the link to it. They want feedback, the stuff about children, the long-term plan, 16, 17-year-olds. I mean, 16, 17-year-olds fall into a
ditch.
No man's land.
It's been for a long time, hasn't it, that young people services finished before the adult services kick in. And it's just at that time when people are at their most vulnerable, aren't they?
Absolutely.
Falling right down that hole. Can we come to Vanessa just briefly to see if there's anything that people are saying in the chat or anything that we want to pick up on? Because I can see that time's running away from us tonight.
Yeah, I mean, we've covered a lot of things naturally as we go along, so that's good. And we've got quite a lot of questions from Anne Simon, who's an old colleague of mine. So hello, Anne. She's just basically lots of positive comments. Tony, really, just saying good amps are the jewel in the crown. They can determine the future of people's lives and psychiatry experience. People are powerless and vulnerable. And then she said she wants to shake your hand and you should be leading and teaching. So there you go.
I'm blushing. Thank you, Anne.
Yeah, and then we've got a good one. What is there to disagree with within the proposed reform? So what wouldn't you agree with? There's nothing I would probably disagree with. It's about the emphasis of doing. My concerns about how we do this stuff is not about the Mental Health Act. It's about the resources around how we implement it. I often have this conversation. You've probably seen it, Vanessa, with psychiatry and critical psychiatry. Do me out of a job. I think I have this conversation about, we talk about 50,000 detentions in a country of 65 million people. Is that a big number? But I think there's a different conversation about, are we overly reliant on the Mental Health Act and coercion to deal with life crisis and to deal with life crisis and to do whatever. I would prefer to get less phone calls. There's no age limit in the Mental Health Act. The eldest person I've been asked to assess is 103. Wow. Can you guess what the youngest was?
10. 10 was my guess.
7. That's kind of ridiculous to me. And I think, once people, I worry that once people are identified in a system, that somehow the system
definitely
doesn't let them go.
Yeah, I agree.
But there's a balance in that. I mean, there are people who are. I would love the system that I work in to be one that people sought out help. When you look at other medical specialties, people are knocking the door and saying, "Let me in," and forming waiting lists. When you look at the most, colleagues will tell me it's the nature of the illness, etc., etc. But the people who are the most unwell, the most distressed, are the people that don't want to be involved with us.
Yeah,
what's that about? Have we thought enough about that? And that goes back to the sort of thing that at the very start when we talked about, how it feels to be assessed. It's not a neutral thing. the 136, most people don't know it's an arrest. It's not a neutral thing. I'm not questioning the officers who use it. They're coming across people who are distressed. But sometimes when people make referrals to us and I say, no, we're not doing it, services take that badly. If something goes wrong, it'll be your fault for not doing it, as if the detention is going to be the solution. Well, sometimes doing nothing is the solution. Yeah. Sometimes doing very little is the solution. But we work in systems and services that are, for reasons that we can probably understand if you ever stood in front of a coroner's court, that has to sometimes be seen to do something, at least assess you. And then there's a pretense maybe that the assessment, risk assessment and risk management are not exact sciences.
No. And there isn't, I think the public are often led to believe that a risk assessment means that nothing bad can happen because it's been assessed as not ever going to happen. And that's not what a risk assessment does. There's there's no such thing as 100% safe. And I think it's very difficult for people when they're led to believe that everything is going to be fine when actually it's a really serious health issue.
I'm not sure we always help.
Sorry.
I'm not sure we always help because we have people telling people that they're experts. Yeah. And there's all sorts of tools and tick boxes. I don't think there are any real experts. I mean, the only people that are expert in their own lives, aren't we? Yeah. But it's the nature of the job. I mean, someone was talking to me this afternoon. So how can you do an assessment on someone in 40 minutes that you don't know? It's a reasonable question, but that's the nature of the job. I am asked to see people like me are asked to see people sometimes with limited information and with people who won't speak to you and with pace clocks and 136 clocks ticking and talking, and we're asked to make a decision. And if we make the wrong decision, we're blamed. Yeah. If we make the right decision, what does that look like? What does it mean? Right for who? So I would like to work in a service that is, I think there's a danger in social media that it's all bad, It's not. My job isn't all bad. It's very difficult sometimes, but it's not all bad. And I always tell the story. Do you know I've met Jesus Christ 7 times? 5 of those times he's been naked, but I have met him 7 times.
It definitely seems to be a hazard of the profession. So we're going to have to sort of come to some sort of end now. But I guess one thing that would be really helpful that people have tweeted about or asked about is what can mental health professionals like nurses, students, other professionals do to help the kind of process of your work? What can they do to be helpful to AMPS?
Stop making referrals.
What about the nature of referral? So if you have to have referral, what should it be like for you to be involved, for it to be meeting the threshold of your involvement?
The serious answer is to own it a bit. Yeah. If you want an AMP to do a mental health act assessment, then own it. I have worked over a long period of time where people talk about it's going to come across as criticism of nurses, and it probably is. I don't want to ruin
nurses here, you're fine.
I don't want to ruin my therapeutic relationship.
Give it a go.
That's bully bullshit. We work with people on a continuum of when they're well and pleasant to us and all sorts of things. Let's be honest with people. If you're in secondary services and being detained before, then the response from services is if you do certain things or meet a certain signature, then we're going to ask for a mental health act assessment. Own it. Yeah. And definitely. Then whose job is to get the bed, Nicky?
I've never ever seen a bed. I've only ever heard about them in stories, Tony.
The mythical bed. It's actually the doctor's job. Yeah. Legally, it's the doctor's job. It's been the power or it's been delegated to bed managers. But actually, if you're going to ask us to go and detain someone, you tell me someone needs to be in hospital, and I do the assessment. Well, have the hospital ready. Yeah. Yeah. So I think ring us less, and actually when you need us and when you have rung us, help us do it properly. Have the docs lined up. Yeah. And tell people. I mean, we get referrals and people haven't been told they're being referred to us.
Yeah, I've seen that, and it's appalling. Absolutely appalling. Yeah.
That's what I mean, and that's what I mean by own it. You know, tell people. And I always say to people that, you know, a mental health assessment, I think currently AMPS and the Mental Health Act is used as a sort of coercive threat. We're going to detain you. We're going to get the AMP. I prefer it was seen as a sort of an opportunity to take stock, because that's what really happens. Remember, we go back to the original figure, we detain less people than we're asked to detain. So it's an opportunity to take stock. Yeah,
definitely. All right, so let's come to Vanessa now, and then we'll come back round for some sort of finishing thoughts with you, Tony. And I honestly think we're going to have to come back to this on another day, because we haven't talked about half the things that we promised we would. So I think we'll consider this part one, and then have to cycle back round again. But Vanessa, what's standing out for you that still needs to be talked about?
I think, first of all, just to say that after the conversation tonight, I'll send out some links and stuff to some of the things that Tony's talked about in the conversation tonight, because I've been following the thread rather than sending links out. So I will do that. There's a comment as well about mental health in schools, but just to say, because I know we're running out of time, that we are going to do a specific AMHTV in a few weeks' time, hopefully, on mental health in schools. So we will come to that one. And other than that, I think we've gone through most things, and I feel like Nicky, really, that we probably need more time to do this justice, and it's been really interesting, and I think hopefully people feel that they know a bit more about it. We've got a great comment from a student, for example, who says, as a student nurse, I've been taking notes on how to be better in the future. So I'm happy with that, really. And certainly we've had a lot of positive comments.
I'll read out some of the negative ones.
They'll find you, Tony. They'll find you. Don't worry about that. That's the beauty of social media. So is there any thoughts that you wanted to leave us with, Tony?
The big thing for me is always around legal literacy. You know, I think people that are doing this stuff should understand the law that we're using to do it. And I think my experience, not just my experience, is that lots of people are doing this stuff who've never read the Mental Health Act, who've never read the Code of Practice. You know, I go onto wards and I see it in the corner and I say, have you ever read it? No. Because somehow people get used to custom and practice.
Yeah, definitely.
You know, so, and I think, and I include people on the receiving end of this. You know, if you came to my house to assess me, you'd have a hard time. Because I know my rights. Yeah. You know, and I'm in a particular position because I am an AMP. But for me, I think better legal and the way I bang on about better legal literacy is, I think if there's better legal literacy, then people's human rights and people's rights in general would be better respected, and they'd have a better time. I mean, you know, there are people currently assessed in police stations requiring admission, and they're there after the pace clock and the 136 clock is paced. What legal power has been used to hold them?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
You know, none's the answer, by the way.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
You know, and people are just making things up sometimes as they go along. You know, because somebody told them to do it.
So I think that's the thing to leave on then. That idea that, you know, there are things that we can do to be better at this, not least read the damn paperwork. It's like, so absolutely. So what we'll do is we'll tweet out some stuff, some guidance on the new Act as well. And mine's done some really interesting stuff, because I know that particularly I was thinking, thank you very much for the students who are looking in. It's not easy to sit down and start ploughing through this stuff, but there are ways into it, and there are discussions to be had around this. And I think this is something we'll definitely come back to. So if it's something that you're interested in, definitely let us know the types and areas and questions that you have, and then we can get a panel together who can actually respond to you on that. Did you want to say something, Vanessa, before we finish?
Yeah, no, I was just going to say we've also got Rethink hopefully coming on in a few weeks' time as well, to talk about some of the work they've been doing as well around the consultation. So we'll be coming back to it for that as well. So look out for that episode as well.
Absolutely. And thank you so much, Tony.
That's right. I said, it was legal literacy, and be nice to your AMPs.
Sneaking one in there under the wire. So, Vanessa, did you want to finish then? Did you want something to say before we go?
No, I mean, the thing for me that's just struck me that we haven't really talked about, and just to squeeze it in at the end, is to say that, you know, no matter what the law says or the Mental Health Act, it's also about your relationship with people, isn't it? And it's about compassion and, you know, having values, because even if you have to detain somebody, still, you know, making them aware of the rights and being compassionate with somebody can go a long way to making the experience, you know, better. So I think, you know, the legal framework is really important, but we also have to hold on to sort of how we relate to people as well within that framework.
And be nice to your aunt, Vanessa. All right, thank you ever so much, and thank you so much, Tony. That's really been helpful. It's been really interesting to have those ideas. So thanks very much, and thank you to everyone who joined in tonight as well. Good night. Good night.
Bye.